In this video, we're going to enhance the animation we've done by adding some lighting effects to our character as she moves through the scene. And we're also going to make a particle effect that will make it rain outside our windows. Let's start with the lighting. If we go to the layer settings for the character, you can see there's a layer shading option. By enabling this and setting the settings right, Moho will try to automatically add shadows to your character. You can't see it on the stage, but if we come out a little ways and Command R to render a preview, you can see Betsy gets these shadows added along her edge that give her a little more volume. However, that's not what we're going to be using this effect for. We actually want to do the opposite. So in the layer settings, I'm going to reverse the direction of the shadow, and I'm going to make the shadow inverted. And I'll also just lower the blur a little. Now when I do a render, we get light up top instead of dark underneath. In fact, I'm going to change the shading color to be a little darker and make the offset bigger so there's more light up top. Cool. That looks good, but we're going to try to do something more advanced and have the lighting change as she goes past each window. I'll warn you that the way I came up to do this is a bit of a hack, but the results will be really cool. First, what I'm going to do is right-click the character layer and pick Reference Layer. Now, this is a perfect replica of the character and all her animation, except I'm going to change the layer shading to come from the front and set the offset to 1 so it will hardly be noticeable. And she'll almost be entirely in shadow. This is for when she's between windows and not getting any light from outside. Now you might notice on the stage, my reference version of Betsy looks super messed up and distorted. That's just some fluke of the stage preview. If I do a render, you can see she looks totally fine. She's going to end up looking really bizarre on the stage, but the rendered version is what we care about. Now I'm going to make another reference of Betsy, giving us 3 copies in total. And I'll change the shadow settings on this one so the light will be coming from top right and have a really big offset. This is for when she's standing at the entryway and the light is coming from the library. Now we're going to use masks to control what version of Betsy is visible in what part of the scene. So on a new vector layer, I'm going to draw 3 big rectangles. Now I'm going to turn my camera animation channels back on so that I can make sure these rectangles line up correctly with the windows from the perspective of the camera as we move through the shot. Then I'll make the rectangles filled and take off the strokes. And there's our first mask. And I'll put that layer in a group with Betsy too. Now to set the mask settings. We want the mask setting on the group to reveal all, and we want the window mask layer at the bottom and set to subtract from mask. And of course, we want Betsy herself set to mask this layer. Then if I render, you can see part of her is getting the light from the window and the rest of her is all dark. As a finishing touch, we'll go to the layer settings for the mask layer and give it some blur. Now there's not a harsh edge where she crosses the matte line. Next we need a mask to reveal the Betsy lit from the library. So I'll make a new layer and set up that mask. I want it sloped, and there's going to be a fairly big blur on it, so I need it to cover her quite a bit to create the right transition as she approaches. And I'll put it in a group with Betsy 3 called Library Light Region. And the mask should go at the bottom. Now this time we want the mask set to hide all. And the mask layer set to add to mask but keep invisible. And Betsy set to mask this layer. And then when we render, we can see on this particular frame, her back half is lit by the window and her front is getting lit from the library. Now on the other side of the cut, we need one more Betsy reference. Then in sequencer view, I'm going to set the visibility of the first 3 Betsys to end at the cut and this 4th copy to only become visible after the cut, just for simplicity. And on this Betsy, I'm just going to turn the shadow effect off. But we still need her back half in shadow to match up with the end of the last shot. So this time I'll make a new layer and draw a shape on it that will serve as our shadow. Then I'll position it and make it vaguely follow the contours of her head and body. And I'm going to look at the shadow settings for one of our other Betsy's so I can find the shadow color and copy it. Then I can make the Shot 2 entry shadow match. And I'll add a blur to that layer as well. Now this time we're actually going to use Betsy as the mask. So I'll put her and the entryway shadow in a group together, and set the group masking to hide all, and set the entryway shadow to mask this layer, and Betsy to add to mask. And if we do a render, there we go, that looks good. Then I'll set the entryway shadow layer to only become visible after the cut. For the rest of this shot, she'll step out of the shadow and just be in the light. And that's it for the shadows. Next, we're going to make it rain outside with some particle effects. First, we need a particle, so I'm just going to make a new layer and draw a long raindrop. Then we'll make a new particle group called Rainfall. And then in the layer settings, open up the particle tab. Oops, I need to put our raindrop inside the particle group. And now out on the timeline, it's using the raindrop as a particle, but it's not behaving like rain. So let's adjust the settings. First of all, let's set the direction to down. And we don't want any acceleration. They should already be going at full speed. Then if I find where they actually are, I can see they're offset from the center of the particle layer a lot. So in the raindrop layer, I'll make sure to set the anchor point centered on the raindrop. And now they're coming from the center of the particle system. Now let's make the source width super wide. This is the region that's going to be generating raindrops. We want it to cover the whole range outside the window. We can also make it a little taller too. Now it looks like I've got the raindrop upside down for the direction we want it to move, so I'll just go into that layer and flip it around. Okay, now the rain is pointed down. Then let's get our particle system outside the windows. I'll orbit the camera and then shift the particle group back so it's behind the windows. I'm also going to increase the source depth of the particle group so that our particles will spawn in the 3D space with some closer or farther away from the camera. Of course, I need to put the actual rainfall layer behind the library model layer. And of course, we want to put the source of the rain up higher than the windows. And now I think I need to scale the raindrop down a bunch. Looks like I definitely want to increase the velocity. And I'm also going to increase the source depth even more. And I want to set the spread for the direction to 0 so the drops are all falling in the same direction. And let's do a render to check. It looks like the raindrops are still too big. So I'll scale the drop down again. Then I'm going to up the velocity and lower the lifespan. The lifespan is how many frames a given particle exists for. Each drop only needs to exist long enough to move past the window where we can see it. So the faster it's going, the less its lifespan needs to be. This will let us get by having to generate fewer total particles in the system. Okay, now that's looking more like how we want, but the rain should be a little denser, so let's up the particle count. And let's check that. Yeah, that looks like enough to me. And looking at it in motion, I think we could stand to up the velocity some more. And there we go. That rain looks good to me. Now, since I decided to use this 3D model as my background, I need to go in and deal with the color and lighting on all of the surfaces. On the Materials tab for that layer, I need to go through each of the materials for the different surfaces in the model and adjust the lighting. I want to reduce the banding effect of the toon shading. In general, a good way to do that is to decrease the intensity of the diffuse and specular lights and increase the ambient intensity. Okay, then the last thing is to replace the sketch of our globe. So I'm going to bring in another 3D model. Now I need to use the lighting tool to set the direction for the light. And it's banding really bad, so if I go into the material for the globe itself, I'm going to make sure to up the bands to 8. Then I'm going to up the ambience and lower the diffuse and specular. But we don't want to lose the shadows entirely, so I need to play around and find the right diffuse and specular settings. Okay, I think that's going to work fine for this shot. Okay, now that we've done all these effects, we want to see what they look like in motion. Since we can't see them on our timeline's playback, we're going to need to export our animation. We'll look at how to export an animation in the next video. I'll see you there.